Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. Alright, so we're here with another episode of Shelf by Shelf, and going to be taking a look at the first few shelves of the next bookshelf here. Starting at the very top, I have some books stacked on top of the shelf because I'm running out of room. And we have some screenplays, unfilmed screenplays written by William Peter Blatty, and some of these are signed. I normally don't like these kind of like leather bound, gold leafed books, but Blatty is I'm such a huge fan of Blatty that I wanted to get these for my collection. Viva's Las Vegas, The Hand Carved Coffins, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which he wrote an original screenplay for, Mastermind, and Demons 5 Exorcists Nothing, which is based off of a book that he wrote kind of about the making of The Exorcist, or a satire. A lot of people don't know that William Peter Blatty was actually a writer of comedy before horror. And then we've got the Golden Dawn, the Book of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, some esoteric knowledge type stuff. And we have the Beastie Boys book, which is an incredible book. Lots of essays written by the band and tons of photos just from all throughout, like basically hip hop history. The Beastie Boys were an incredibly important part of my life, and the ghost of MCA is felt throughout this entire book. I miss MCA a great deal. His was one celebrity death that really impacted me emotionally. And then we have the Duck books, so Don Rosa Library, Scrooge McDuck and Donald Duck and the Nephews, the DuckTales type stuff, globe-trotting, pulpy adventures with ducks. Fantastic stuff, kind of instant feel-good. Great stuff, great art and stories. And then we're going to go down to this shelf here, which is one of the only Murakami books I still own, Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and his Years of Pilgrimage. Cool cover. I think I kept this one because of the cover. I like Murakami, I just don't collect his stuff. Then a couple newer versions of Dune. This here is a brand new version of Dune that just came out. It looks almost like they're trying to make it look like a modern manga or something, but I really like the colors and I like the ink on this side of the pages. It's a pretty nice edition, but I really like this edition for a modern edition of Dune. I think that is just killer looking, super minimal, and really nice. And then we've got the Airlock Books. So I've talked about these a little bit before on the Weird West video. And that is the Merkaba Writer series. Highly recommended. They are back in print now. And then a couple other of his books, which I have not read yet. All right, and then we've got a little bit of nonfiction, some political stuff, so I'll skip that. And then we get into a section from an author who is one of the most important authors in my life, and I think one of the most influential authors who ever lived in the world of speculative fiction. And that is, of course, J.G. Ballard, the great European writer, English writer. This is his autobiography that is absolutely unbelievably well written and amazing. He is probably most famous for his nonfiction account of his life, which was made into the movie Empire of the Sun. So he grew up in Japanese-occupied Shanghai in World War II and lived a very interesting childhood, moved back to the UK, got married. His wife died at a very early age, and he basically lived in the same house his entire life, raising his 3 children on his own and writing some of the best fiction that has ever been written, ranging from all the way back in his early career to pretty straightforward science fiction, on to speculative fiction, on to the new wave science fiction. He moved into incredibly experimental fiction with probably his best known work, and that is the Atrocity Exhibition, which is an absolutely amazing book. There are stories in here, or segments in here, with names like Why I Want to Fuck Ronald Reagan and the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, considered as a downhill motor race. The plan for the assassination of Jacqueline Kennedy, Love and Napalm, Export USA, Crash, The Generation of America, Note Towards a Mental Breakdown. I don't believe there has ever been an author who understood modern society better than J.G. Ballard. He wrote about kind of like school shootings before they were in vogue. His film criticism is amazing. His essays on just modern life. His science fiction is speculative and asks very tough questions with very hard answers. The Kindness of Women is kind of a follow-up to The Empire of the Sun. High Rise was basically made into a film all about like gated communities. Hello America. He was absolutely fascinated with American culture and with the rise of the celebrity politician. He would have been appalled and somewhat ecstatic to write about what is happening in America right now with that guy. And yeah, if you want to get into him, I highly recommend picking up this complete stories of J.G. Ballard. It's all of his short stories, and it is just an amazing read. He's a life-changing author. There is your life before you've read J.G. Ballard and your life after you've read J.G. Ballard. I cannot recommend his work enough, but just know, I mean, he's going to challenge you. He's going to challenge you philosophically, politically. His writing can be both lyrical and poetic, and also hard to impenetrable in some cases, especially with some of his more experimental stuff like the Atrocity Exhibition. But I cannot say enough good things about J.G. Ballard. And then coming down here into another B. Well, first of all, we got this book of an art exhibit that Tim Burton did in Las Vegas that me and my wife and my sister and her husband went to see. And then we get into William Peter Blatty, which I have mentioned before on the channel. I think last October I did a reread of The Exorcist. But with the follow-up, one of the follow-ups to The Exorcist, Legion and the Ninth Configuration, which is like the second part of his trilogy of faith, and Legion is the third part. The Ninth Configuration is one of my favorite novels of all time. I've got a few copies of that. So it was originally called Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane. So I've got that one there. I got this one here that I found when I was in Australia back in 2010. So I kind of try to pick up copies of that when I can. This here is one of my prized book possessions. This version of the Ninth Configuration from Centipede Press. Super limited, it's signed, and it contains both versions, the Ninth Configuration and Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane. And then here's a couple versions of that screenplay, of the book that screenplay was based on, Demons 5, Exorcist Nothing. An older hardback, and then the Centipede Press version. And then we've got the screenplays for The Exorcist, which he wrote, and Legion, the movie starring George C. Scott. Great movie. I actually like Exorcist 3, Legion, more than I like the original Exorcist movie, and William Peter Blatty directed that. And then another screenplay, but this contains some writing that he did on The Exorcist, on making the movie, and that is also mirrored here in this. If there were demons, then perhaps there were angels. So Blatty's pretty interesting. He was a true believer in demons and exorcisms and angels, and he kind of spent his entire life trying to prove the existence of I guess you could say Christian mythology. And this is kind of the book where he lays out that I'll tell them I remember you. He truly believed that he was contacted by his mother from beyond the grave. And unfortunately, he became kind of, he became very, very conservative towards the end of his life. And I struggled with some of the things that he started to believe in, but his writing speaks for itself, and it is unmatched in terms of dialogue. And his humor also, something that a lot of you forget that he's a super humorous author, and that comes through. And this is one of his early humorous novels. And then we've got The Exorcist on Blu-ray, a book called Crazy. This is another one of my favorite books, Centipede Press Studies in the Horror Film The Exorcist. This is an entire, just huge collection of essays and interviews with all the various people who made The Exorcist, The Exorcist 2, Legion, and I believe some of the later ones with the Paul Schrader movies. I've not seen those. Another version of The Exorcist, kind of a haunted house story he wrote called Elsewhere, and then 2 copies of Demeter, which is another kind of, a lot of the stuff he started writing post-Exorcist was Christian apologetics, and this is kind of another take on that. So with The Exorcist is his trilogy of faith, and he used with The Exorcist the existence of evil to say that there must be an opposite good. With the 9th configuration, he was trying to study the idea of a truly altruistic act and what that says about humankind and the presence of God. And he was a very thoughtful author. But yeah, I like him a lot. And let's see, a couple little books here. So this at one time was my favorite book ever, by Alan Lightman, Einstein's Dreams. I used to read this every year for about 10 years. And it's a little tiny book. You can easily read it in a day. I would take a day off from work and just kind of go to a coffee shop and sit for a few hours and read it. It's a book all about Albert Einstein telling a friend about his dreams. And Alan Lightman is a scientist and he incorporates a lot of science and ideas and philosophy into his writing. So really unique book. I haven't read it in a while though. I should get back to it. And then another one that he wrote called Good Benito. And then we have a book here that's really out of place. Somehow it ended up here, but that is Joe Haldeman's Infinite Dreams, science collection of short stories. Joe Haldeman, of course, the writer of The Forever War, my favorite work of military science fiction. And then we move into a little bit of a weird fiction section here with Painted Devils, Strange Stories by Robert Aickman. And we have The Tales of the Mysterious and Macabre by Algernon Blackwood. This very odd book that I have not read, and I don't know why I picked it up. I've been meaning to read it for years. I never get around to it. But The Life of Polycrates, Polycrates, I believe, and Other Stories for Antiquated Children by Brendan Connell. And that is, let's see, turn these pages and let the sins and manias, let's start over. Turn these pages and let the sins and manias of human history pass in exquisite raiment before you. Heading the procession, The Life of Polycrates describes the rise to power of the ancient Greek ruler, his eccentric deeds, and the fantastic personalities around him. And in the train of this novella, witness a bacchanal of philanderers and a medieval holy man, a motorcycle daredevil, and aesthetes of rarefied sensibility. This is a book of bizarre life studies that explores the frontiers of human passion as it is lived by the legendary and the obscure. So yeah, all right. I'm going to have trouble pronouncing some of the words in that book, but And then we have, let's see, Eyes of God. This was a collection of weird fiction and poetry from R.H. Barlow, one of Lovecraft's circle. Lovecraft worked with him quite a bit. And then we move into a little Thomas Ligotti section. Thomas Ligotti has enjoyed a little bump in popularity recently, probably mainly due to the first season of True Detective, which Cole, Matthew McConaughey's character, his kind of entire worldview was partly inspired by The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, a work of nonfiction of nihilistic philosophy from Thomas Ligotti. This is a collection of 2 little short stories. The Shadow at the Bottom of the Well, another short story collection. Teatro Grotesco, a fantastic short story collection. My Work Is Not Yet Done, a short novel of corporate horror. So he works a lot with corporate horror. It's hard to explain, but just imagine if you went to work one day and your boss had been possessed by a elder being and the weird things that might happen because of that. Noctuary, short story collection. Born into Fear, a collection of interviews. Grimm's Scribe, another short story collection. I love that cover. That thing is so creepy. I don't think that's him, but there's only like 1 or 2 pictures of Thomas Ligotti known. He's such a recluse, and he hasn't written any fiction, or he hasn't published any fiction in many years. Songs of a Dead Dreamer. This is the first time I read his short story called The Frolic, which is one of the only works of fiction that actually scared me. So I read a lot of horror, and I'm actually going to do a video about this, but like I'm not really scared of books, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that in an upcoming video. Then we have a collection here by U.G. Foster, and that is Returning My Sister's Name and Other Far Eastern Tales of Whimsy and Malice. And then we've got this really interesting book that I hardly hear anybody ever talk about. I've only read it in bits and pieces. It's super complex, and it's kind of like pounding my head against the wall, but someday I'm going to work my way through it. And it's called Cyclonopedia, Complicity with Anonymous Materials by Reza Negarestani. Now this does remind me a little bit of J.G. Ballard's Atrocity Exhibition. What does this say? The Middle East is a sentient entity. It is alive, concludes renegade Iranian archaeologist Dr. Hamid Parsani before disappearing under mysterious circumstances. The disordered notes he leaves behind testify to an increasingly deranged preoccupation with oil as the lubricant of historical and political narratives. At once a horror fiction, a work of speculative theology, an atlas of demonology, a political samizdat, and a philosophical grimoire, Cyclonopedia is a work of theory fiction on the Middle East, where horror is restlessly heaped upon horror. The author bridges the appalling vistas of contemporary world politics and the war on terror with the archaeologies of the Middle East and the natural history of the earth itself. So pretty interesting. Seems like a highly ambitious work, maybe one that was too flawed for its own good, but I don't know. I like that kind of stuff. And then we've got a book here on making music with Ableton Live and a couple of the programs from the Hateful Eight 70mm projection that I went to. So yeah, that's it. Some really heavy hitters on these shelves. Starting up here, of course, with Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck, heavy hitters. Dune, going into an absolutely life-changing author, J.G. Ballard, unbelievably amazing man and author. Then into William Peter Blatty, one of my favorite just writers, period. And then onto some pretty major works of weird fiction, and then Thomas Ligotti, one of the kind of like the third pillar of American horror, I guess you could say. Some people say. But yeah, all right, well, that's it for this episode of Shelf by Shelf. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.